Donald Trump is weak. Let's not get it twisted. This is a man who is insecure with himself, who is always scared and worried about how he is perceived, and he should be, because he's perceived the way that he is, a bumbling idiot with no strength no matter how hard he tries to project it. And it's not just at home where his poll numbers are tanking and Americans literally view him as physically and mentally weak, but it's abroad as well, and we've seen that time after time as Donald Trump is going through state visits right now, and it is what all of us saw when he was in China trying to impress Xi Jinping, and he failed miserably because he didn't even know how to walk. And we're going to get into it all, but before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button because it goes a long way in supporting our work. Now, before we get into what happened at the meeting, Donald Trump's just inability to walk, having to ask his handlers for help, I want to start with what happened after, because it really colors the weakness of Donald Trump and how he's viewed on the world stage, especially when he said this about China, Russia, and Ukraine.
Work together to see if we can get something done. We agree that the sides are, locked in and fighting, and sometimes you have to let them fight, I guess. Crazy. But he's going to help us, and we're going to work together on Ukraine. There's not a lot more we can do. He's been buying oil from Russia for a long time. It takes care of a big part of China. And, I can say India's been very good on that front. But we didn't really discuss the oil. We discussed working together to see if we could get that war finished. It doesn't affect China. It doesn't affect us. And I'd like to see it done on the basis I don't like to see 6, 7, 8,000 young people, mostly young people, for the most part soldiers, be killed. It's not costing us anything. In fact, we make money, and I don't even want to talk about making money. I don't care about making money in that case. But, we send weapons to NATO. They buy full price. They buy the weapons. They give them to whoever, but I think they give them probably to Ukraine for the most part. And we discussed it. We discussed something. We're going to work together to try and get the war with Russia and Ukraine solved.
So first of all, it does affect us, this war, Putin's war, this disgusting, senseless war, the war you said you would solve and stop, and you haven't again because Donald Trump is the weakest president we've ever had. But it's also important to note that in the same breath that Donald Trump says, well, China has nothing to do with Russia, he's also talking about the oil that they're buying up, the relationship that they have. We just saw Putin take a state visit to China. He was with Xi Jinping. They are buddies, and Donald Trump wants that love. We know Donald Trump lashed out at China. He lashed out at Putin when he saw them together, feeling left out, that no one likes Donald. Oh, no one likes Donald. It's because he's weak, and everyone views him as a joke on the world stage. They laugh at him either to his face or behind his back. We saw that with Donald Trump's recent peace summit, which was anything but that. But this is why Donald Trump needs to pretend that he's strong, and why he made this announcement about nuclear testing right before the meeting, and it's very important.
Nuclear testing, what about resuming nuclear testing? What prompted you to do that right before the meeting?
It had to do with others. They seem to all be nuclear testing.
Russia?
We have more nuclear weapons than anybody. We don't do testing, and we've halted it many years ago. But with others doing testing, I think it's appropriate that we do also.
Any details around the testing, sir? Like where, when?
It'll be announced. We have test sites. It'll be announced.
Did Israel give you a...
So Donald Trump made an announcement saying that the U.S. is going to resume, for the first time in decades, testing of our nuclear arsenal. And why did Donald Trump do that before his meeting with Xi Jinping? Because he wanted to appear strong, and he knows that there's nothing he personally can do to appear strong, and so he has to talk about the Department of War and all the fake pull-ups that Pete Hegseth does, and how he's the biggest tough guy president in history, how he's sicking troops on communities, how he's attacking trans people, how he's a bigot towards black women and says that they have low IQs because he knows he himself is the one who is a moron, barely able to point out an elephant on a fucking cognitive exam, and he couldn't take his SATs. He needed someone else to do it. So poor little Donald is feeling weak, and he's acting weak because in the meeting, he had to ask for help with his walking. Confused Trump, 79, asked how to walk off stage. Donald Trump's meeting with Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping got off to an awkward start as the president looked lost trying to walk off stage after the two leaders were introduced. Before sitting down together to try to hash out their trade differences during the summit in South Korea, Trump and Xi greeted one another outside the meeting room and shook hands in front of the U.S. and Chinese flags. The diplomatic tour has fueled concerns about the 79-year-old's health as he had made random missteps and off-script rambles. After about a minute of small talk and posing for the cameras, Trump gestures to Xi to their left and said, "Let's go." He then looked to someone off stage and asked, "Which way?" before nodding, turning, and walking off to the right instead. The confusion came after Trump had insisted that he and Xi would have had a very successful meeting, despite the Chinese leader being a very tough negotiator. "That's not good," he joked as Xi failed to react. "We know each other well," Trump added. For Trump supporters, the moment was similar to Joe Biden at a Normandy D-Day commemoration last year. MAGA and conservative voices slammed him for walking off stage and struggling to sit down. An awkward clip was circulated on social media, including one message from Charlie Kirk. So Donald Trump doesn't know where he's going, what he's saying, what he's doing. He just wants to appear tough. And when you can't walk around without literally asking your handlers to help give you directions, when it's one of two ways, Don, it's either left or right, I'm going to go ahead and say that's not a good look for Trump. And I think it's important that these stories get covered because the mainstream media so often neglects talking about Donald Trump's very clear and obvious cognitive and physical decline. And we are going to be every single day on this show because if we don't, nobody will. After Donald Trump was caught with makeup all over his hands, it was YouTubers like myself, Adam Mockler, Midas Touch, Brian Tyler Cohen, who brought it up and made Carolyn Levitt address it. The mainstream media wasn't covering it, with the notable exception of Lawrence O'Donnell, who's always on this. And so we have to do our jobs and point out how Trump is clearly in decline when he doesn't know which way to walk in a room with literal lines on the ground directing him where to go. But again, this is the weakness of Donald Trump. And it's why the third term, the idea that he's going to run again, although scary and must be taken seriously in the way that we fight back against it, and this obvious authoritarian takeover is kind of a joke when you see how weak Donald Trump is, and Chris Hayes broke it all down right here.
For years, MAGA has been selling Donald Trump as a political colossus, an inevitable force of nature who cannot be beaten. But everywhere around us, we are seeing evidence that that's not really true. And part of the reason that is happening is because Americans are seeing up close the damage, feeling the pain. People are opposing ICE agents raiding their neighbors, going out in the streets with whistles. They're getting notices that their health premiums are skyrocketing and their food stamps will run out. Federal workers are going unpaid for weeks now as Donald Trump builds a gilded $300 million ballroom no one but him asked for. The more unpopular Trump and the Republicans grow, the harder they try to project strength with lies. Like House Speaker Mike Johnson today trying to convince reporters that keeping the House in recess and the government shut down is actually doing wonders for their numbers.
House and Senate Democrats are openly admitting that this is their shutdown. You have seen the highlight reel of all of them stumbling into admitting that. And yet they're also incoherently claiming that the shutdown is somehow on the fault of the other party. And the people aren't buying it. And that's why the polling continues to show that the approval of Republicans in Congress is rising with each passing day.
Wait a second. Approval of Republicans in Congress rising each passing day? That's a lie. Johnson was very selectively citing a Quinnipiac poll from last week that showed congressional Republicans are underwater by 24 points. He's right. They are up from being underwater by 29 points in July, although that was closer when they passed that extremely, extremely unpopular bill. The same poll also shows more Americans blame Republicans for the shutdown by a significant 6-point margin, and that margin is growing among independents. So no, shutting down the government isn't leading to Republican popularity going up by the day. But the entire Trump era is built on this kind of wish casting, psyching people out and faking strength until it is handed over to them. That is the proper context you need when you think about the freakout currently happening over this comment.
He's going to get a third term. So Trump 28, Trump is going to be president 28, and people just ought to get accommodated with that.
So what about the 22nd Amendment?
There's many different alternatives. At the appropriate time, we'll lay out what the plan is. But there's a plan, and President Trump will be the president in 28.
That, of course, is two-shirted podcasting strategic genius Steve Bannon declaring a third unconstitutional term for Donald Trump. In that interview, he also claimed Trump was, quote, an instrument of divine will who's being saved by God to save America. Now, Bannon says a lot of things all over the place, talking. Many of them are untrue. But this has worked to flood the zone, as Bannon would say, with this stilted Trump third term discourse. Bannon's talking to reporters about it, and now so is Trump, and so is Johnson.
I think the president knows, and he and I have talked about the constrictions of the Constitution, as much as so many American people lament that. The Trump 2028 cap is one of the most popular that's ever been produced, and he has a good time with that, trolling the Democrats whose hair is on fire. This is, I think, a classic example of MAGA projecting the power they wish they had.
but it comes from a place of real, genuine, palpable political weakness. I mean, take a step back and look at what's being discussed here. One of the most unpopular presidents in American history, talking about a third term less than a year into his second term. Today, the polling average kept by Nate Silver shows Donald Trump underwater by about 10 points. He's also at net double-digit negatives in the most recent polls from Economist YouGov, Quinnipiac, Reuters, Ipsos, American Research Group, and Gallup. In all those polls, he is at or near his lowest approval level ever. We're talking high 30s, low 40s. And the man who once said he alone could fix high prices on day one is now deeply unpopular on core economic issues. In a new Reuters Ipsos poll today, nearly two-thirds disapprove of Trump's handling of the cost of living. Only 27% approve. You're down to like the most diehards when you're down to 27%. And we haven't gotten any new jobs data because of the shutdown, ostensibly. But all you got to do is look at the headlines of layoffs in the past few days. You got Amazon, UPS, GM, Paramount, Nestle, Carter's, Target, tens of thousands of jobs being slashed by blue chip companies struggling to stay profitable amid Trump's tariffs and what appears to be an all-around slowdown.
Donald Trump is weak, and we all know it. Let's just point it out and make it clear. This inevitability that MAGA pretends that he has is incredibly damaging when you look at the corporations and the institutions that have caved to Trump. The idea that he will always win is one of the strongest powers that he has. So let's take it away from him. That's our ability. We did it with Jimmy Kimmel. We can continue to do it with protest, and we can continue to do it by just pointing out the fact that this guy